Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to the Risk Academy. This will be Chapter 2 today. We're actually going to talk about risk governance. That's what we're going to discuss next. The first chapter, if you missed it, is about what an enterprise risk management actually is, the program is, and what a risk is, and sort of something between tactical and strategic risks to help you understand it. Now we're actually going to start into how you would put this in place. And governance is, we're going to start at the top and work our way down, because just like anything else in a business, if it doesn't have the buy-in and the push from the very top, you will not be successful. So this is how we start from the top, put it in from the top, and sort of set the rules by which the risk program will run and how it will function and how it will get implemented so that it will actually occur. Okay, so our governance, our risk program governance. First question is who? Who is accountable for making this happen? And then who is responsible for actually making it occur? You got people that are accountable, that it actually has to happen, and then the people that sort of demand that it happen or manage it on a day-to-day basis, so to speak. So in a larger corporation, number one, governance always starts at the board of directors. Always and forever. Director is in their name. They're directing things that the business needs to do. So the board of directors should be saying, we need to have an enterprise risk management program to handle all of our risk and help us here. That typically goes then to your CEO or COO, the chief executive, or the chief operating officer. You may have one, you may have both, maybe the same person. They are sort of responsible for directing the day-to-day operations to make it happen. Now, they're not doing most of the work, but they're responsible to make sure that it gets put in because the board of directors gave them the direction. I sort of look at it this way. Governance, just like the government, they set up the laws and rules on how society operates. Your board of directors is responsible for creating those rules and the directives that your company needs to operate on. Your CEO and COO are responsible for making sure those happen. Now, they may delegate some things to different people in your organization. Hopefully, since you're medical, okay, you have something called a corporate compliance program. In the much larger organizations, I guarantee you they have that. So something called the Chief Compliance Officer may be responsible for it. Typically, your enterprise risk management is just another part of your corporate compliance program. However, because we know most medical practices tend to be on the smaller side, sometimes it's the one person doing all of these jobs, but you do have it somehow. So in the governance really starts with the board of directors saying this will happen from on high. The chief executive officer, chief operating officer for that organization says it's got to happen. And again, in larger organizations, they sort of direct your corporate compliance program, and the person who runs that, typically called the corporate compliance officer, to then actually make that happen, make it occur. They're responsible for making it happen. In a very large organization, a very large hospital, they have people under them who are responsible for them, like the chief risk officer, for example. You get into whole lots of titles the larger you get. So again, sometimes all this is the same person. Think about it if you have a 5-doc practice and one doc owns everything. So this all may be one person. You don't know. But most importantly, you've got to have it from the top pushed down. If it's coming from the top, everyone will follow it, and it makes it much easier to actually get put in. Okay, we're medical. The very next question that comes up, and the one that actually prompts the discussion of risk most of the time, what about HIPAA? We're with HIPAA risk. I don't understand. It's HIPAA. Okay? And the reason being, we've got a 22-year-old mandate now that the actual Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996 has it mandated this. So that actually requires, in black and white, it's written down that you have to do an annual risk assessment for HIPAA around your healthcare information, whether it's in written format or whether it's in electronic format that includes everything about it, the privacy of it and the security of it, both of them. So your HIPAA estimate, you're legally regulatory obligated to do this. So how does all this fit with this enterprise risk management and everything else? Your HIPAA risk is just a part of the enterprise risk management. Okay? So if you've got, for example, OSHA requirements that you've got risks for, well, that's part of your enterprise risk management. And anything that you have to meet, that's why I mentioned the corporate compliance program. Corporate compliance is all about complying with the regulations that you have to do. Well, HIPAA is another regulation. So it's part of that, and you make HIPAA risk part of your overall enterprise risk management. Because if you're doing enterprise risk management in that program, you cover HIPAA as part of it. So it sort of is a natural thing. When we get into specifics about how the thing works, there's a, sort of a rinse and repeat cycle that we will talk about that's consistent. You're constantly doing this over and over and over again, that cycle. That's actually one of the very next videos. But you need to understand that HIPAA is just a part of your larger risk. So instead of thinking, oh my God, I got a HIPAA this and then I got ERM, it's the same thing. If you develop this and use the same process and identify your risks and you treat your risks, at the end of the year, you'll be able to print out a document and show, boom, here it is, and you're done. That's literally what they wanted. And the actual laws that mandate the HIPAA, the annual risk assessment, they talk about you doing an annual risk assessment and reviewing yourself. And that's what this whole program will do. It sets up a process that you can do and sort of rinse and repeat and help identify these things. So if you do your enterprise risk management program and set it up correctly, it'll take care of and provide you the things that HIPAA mandates that you need to have. Okay, so how do we actually start to put this in from the top down? Well, there's 7 steps that we have here, and we're going to talk about these. The first one is you have to develop the context and purpose. The context of your organization. This is something board of directors will figure out. What's the context we need to put risk management in? You know, for example, they may decide that it's not covering, strategic financial risks, for example, but it covers everything else. They will decide the context of when it is. Maybe if you have a corporation where you have multiple sub-entities underneath it, maybe they decide that it only covers 2 of the 4. Again, something that your board of directors, the high-level people that set up and give you direction on how to do this. The next piece is setting up the scope and the charter, just like a regular project. What does it actually cover? It covers those 2 business units. It covers everything in the organization. It will cover this area and not that area. You actually set the scope of what this program will cover. Again, this is a lot of the board of directors telling us. The next piece is really key. Setting up, giving someone the authority for it to actually happen. Setting up a structure that it can happen with. And really important, something people forget about, how do they want the reporting to happen? Do they want to know about it monthly? Do they want to know about it quarterly? Do they only want to hear about it for example, do they only want to hear about the high risks quarterly? Do they want to see the whole entire risk register annually? They're going to set the reporting requirements because they're the ones that want to look at the reports, the grade card, to say how you're doing. That's where you have things like metrics and things like that, so you've got some independent way to judge. The next piece, we will talk heavily about this in another video, is asset identification, IDing what you have, what's actually of value to the organization, classifying it, It's very key for a corporate organization to classify things correctly. Intellectual property is much different than publicly available material like your website. And the ownership, who owns these things? Because owners of assets have specific things they must do in terms of the risk management process. This next one actually talks about the risk management objectives, what we're trying to accomplish, our goals. We actually want to write those down. This is what we want to do. You notice we've sort of put things on paper, haven't really done anything yet. The last piece is we're going to pick a risk methodology, a structured way of getting this done so that the work can get done. We're going to talk a lot about risk frameworks when we get to this methodology, because there's different ones you can use that sort of tell you, like the checklist, so are we doing this, are we doing this, are we doing this? These frameworks will help you implement this. And the last piece is decide who's actually going to implement it. Your board, probably working with your CEO or COO, will decide who's actually going to implement this. So the Chief Compliance Officer is responsible for doing it, and the implementation team will include them and the Senior Business Line Manager. Or if you're a small practice, it could be it's the two owners, it's the practice administrator, and it is our billing manager, because they're the smart one that can help us manage all this. Picking your implementation team. Notice we actually haven't done anything yet other than figuring out how we're going to set it up. Kind of looks like a project, doesn't it? You start with what you're trying to do, scope it out, authority structure, all the way down to who's going to implement it before you actually start doing anything. So this, again, is highly important to have all this in place. I equate this to building a house. This is setting up your plans, your architectural plans, before you actually go dig in the ground and order stuff to build it. You actually want to get this in place first. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we finished today talking about governance, getting it put from on high down through your organization, how it's supposed to run. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about, our next video, we're going to talk about a difference, because you hear all these different risk terms, what a risk program is versus what a risk process is versus what a risk assessment is versus what a risk analysis is. They're all something different. And because no one understands them, they use these terms interchangeably, and they're not. So we'll kind of go over that, because you need to sort of understand those differences to actually start building things. And we'll actually get into building things starting in video number 4 or chapter 4. Thank you very much for coming.